We'll get started. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Hope you're having a good afternoon. My name is Emily Cantrell, and I'm the director here at World Trade Center Seattle. For those of you unfamiliar with our organization, we are a member-based organization owned by the Port of Seattle and managed by Columbia Hospitality. Our physical operations are suspended, but I am here now, as you can see. This is the Holland America line room behind me. This is typically our dining room and also where we hold our events and a la carte lunch service. And when we reopen, our refresh project should be just about complete. For any of our members wanting a sneak peek, you should join our monthly member happy hour tomorrow. We'll do a little show and tell. I also want to note that the reason I'm here is due to Wi-Fi issues at my home. And I know a couple of us are experiencing that today, so apologies in advance for any issues that are out of our control today during this program. So we did not want to stop our mission of bringing leaders together during the time of physical distancing, which is why we created this series, Navigating Business in Times of Crisis. It's 3 parts. We finished the adapting part last week, and now we are in the recovering phase of the series. And then in a couple of weeks, we will start the looking ahead phase. And we also want to recognize that you're all probably zoomed out. The honeymoon phase of virtual meetings, I think, has come to an end, but we promise to make this hour worth your while. It means a lot to have you join us. So we'll spend about the next 45 minutes with a moderated discussion, and then we will enter Q&A. We are recording this, and we will upload it a little later today. So today's topic is the path to recovery. And I'd like to introduce our speakers today. Here in Seattle, Brian McGowan is the president and CEO of Greater Seattle Partners, a public-private partnership created to advance economic growth and competitiveness for the Puget Sound region. Brian is relatively new to our state. He joined us about a year and a half ago from Atlanta, where he led the city's economic development agency and served as executive vice president for the Metro Atlanta Chamber. Another impressive tidbit is in 2009, President Obama appointed Brian as U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Commerce. Brian also served as an economic advisor to the White House after the BP oil spill and helped New Orleans implement programs to recover from Hurricane Katrina. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you.
And Chris Mefford also joins us. Chris is an expert in regional economic development and data analysis. He founded Community Attributes in Seattle in 2005, which provides economic analysis, urban planning strategies, and technology tools. Prior to founding CAI, Chris served as senior planner for the Puget Sound Regional Council. Chris often speaks on the regional economy and its relevance to community development. He also serves as Mayor Durkin's appointed economist on the Seattle City Light Advisory Panel. So welcome, Chris. Thank you both so much for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Well, let's start with something positive. Tell me one silver lining that has come from COVID-19. Chris, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. You know, I was thinking about this in some prior calls like this. One thing that I hope comes out of it in a very positive fashion is that a number of people realize we can do more than we think we can. We can make it through harder times than we thought were possible. Folks are figuring out how to miss a paycheck, how to take a pay cut. And what I hope comes from that is people being willing to take more risk as they recover, right? So if they see now that the downside, what they're going through now is probably worse than what they thought they'd ever have to go through, then maybe they can turn that into being willing to take more personal risk with their careers, with new business ideas, and to take hits like that as part of that sacrifice it takes towards more risk taking and toward more innovation and entrepreneurialism.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. And you, Brian?
Being new to this region, you know, we've all seen the kind of vitriol, unfortunately, between the public and private sector. I have been extremely impressed over the last month and a half about how the public and private sector have really come together. I'm on, weekly, almost daily calls with a group called Challenge Seattle, and you're hearing the CEOs of big companies and our government agencies working together, helping each other, sharing resources, sharing information. And I'm also aware of, regional collaborations between counties. And so, I think this region is, unfortunately, over time has kind of balkanized a bit. And maybe the silver lining here is that we'll come together and realize that we all need each other to be successful, that all of our boats will rise or fall together.
That's great. And I know we'll definitely be discussing more about regional collaboration. So over the weekend, for those of you who did not see it, Yahoo Finance cited a report by Moody's Analytics that listed Seattle among the top 5 cities best poised to recover quickly from this pandemic. The others included San Jose, Durham, Austin, and Minneapolis. And this is reportedly cited to low population density and high degrees of educational attainment. The cities facing great challenges included New York City, Boston, Miami, Las Vegas, and San Francisco. Think, big tourist cities, and also cities that are relying on public transportation heavily, like New York and the subway system. So Brian and Chris, what are your thoughts on this research? Do you agree? Either one of you can jump in first.
I'll just put out there that I do agree. Another hat I wear is I'm a non-resident fellow at the Brookings Institute for the last about 5 years. And
Brian, we are losing you a little bit. If you want to maybe try turning off your video.
I'm going to turn off my video.
And apologies, everyone. This happens with these virtual meetings.
All right. All right, that's better for, hopefully that's better for, no?
Yes.
Can you still hear me? Okay, good. So I was saying I agree. I've been saying from the beginning that I do believe that our economy will probably come out faster than other economies. So a couple of things there. Going into this pandemic, our economy last year was the fastest, our regional economy was the fastest growing economy in the United States as measured by GDP. So that was the first time in a long time. We're currently the 11th largest economy in the United States. The city I came from happens to be number 10. And if we didn't have the pandemic, it was pretty clear that we were going to pass Atlanta in size of economy. So I think there's a lot of reasons for that. We're a big, diverse economy. We're very international. We have big tech companies here. We have 3 deep water ports. We have a healthcare biotech sector, all of which are going to be important as the global economy emerges from this recession. So I think the combination of those things will say that we'll probably be one of the regions that will emerge as a winner in the long run after this is over.
Thank you, Brian. And Chris, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think all those points Brian made are spot on. We've got several things going for us, but a couple of things working against us that we need to, look at it as sort of a mixed bag. One of the things going for us, we were first in, so we'll be first out. And I think the region's done a very good job at recognizing the public health risks and working their way through that with the priority. As we've been saying all along throughout the past 2 months, that the best economic recovery strategies are public health recovery strategies. And this region seems to have embraced that well. So I think we're on a good path there. And then all those reasons Brian mentioned, all the industry strength, our tech sectors will be part of the solutions to the global challenges. And as part of the solutions, they'll lead with innovation and find new ways to adapt and innovate and to bring new things. The topics that concern me the most, of course, aerospace and the challenges going through Boeing company that were bad enough without the COVID crises, but then just compounded with all the impact of air travel. And then the one that probably ranks as high as anything is the impact on visitors and tourism in this region. It's such a big part of who Seattle is and our identity, and so much of our ability to attract talent starts with bringing people in as visitors and tourists, that until that is back in a safe way, then I'm concerned about that impact to our downtown and other parts of the city.
Right, it is still so shocking to see the streets so empty a couple months into this.
For sure.
And Chris, being an economist, you love data. So can you please spend the next several minutes sharing with us some of the data that you have on hand?
Yeah, happy to do so, of course. Let's see, make sure.
And for anyone who just joined us, we do have Brian McGowan with us as well via phone, and he may attempt to share his video again in a little bit.
Yeah. And Brian and Emily, please feel free to interrupt and add your own commentary to this or redirect. I've given a number of economic update talks lately. You know, when crises hit, everyone tries to do what they can, and that community attributes, that means we go make PowerPoints, right? So that's what we can do to help. So we jumped on that from the beginning and started helping out, and the only way we know how to help. And, in several of my
Chris,
talks,
I just want to know, I love your PowerPoint.
Oh, good, thank you. I appreciate it.
I love your PowerPoint.
Okay, good. We're glad we can, you know, everyone leads with their strengths, right? You know, it's helpful to think back to where we were just to appreciate. You know, this is the slide that I gave with the Puget Sound Business Journal back in early February, or maybe end of January. And at that time, we were saying, you know, we're at the end of a historic long economic growth period. And the question was, are we truly at the end? And no one had any certainty about that. We knew the expansion was sort of long in the tooth, but we didn't have any specificity to express concerns over. Unemployment rate was at historic lows. Economists were saying it was actually lower than they thought it could possibly have gotten. We had this notion of what is full employment, and the consensus was we were at a lower rate than that would have been expected. So of course, you know, that wasn't that long ago is my point. Just a few weeks ago, we were riding high. Then the virus hit. And ordinarily we talk through what's it mean for the virus to hit? What are the non-economic events that happened? And to keep it brief here today, we're skipping right into the economic impacts that were triggered. And there were these 2 or 3 rounds of secondary impacts. First, just the disruptions, but then all the reaction to those disruptions, which were fear and uncertainty, incomes dropping. And that uncertainty is the biggest thing. We're going to come back to that several times. There's just nothing businesses hate worse than uncertainty. If they have something they can rely on, they can plan around and they can adapt and change accordingly. But these periods of uncertainty are the hardest things for economies to work through. And they lead to secondary impacts across the world, as you all know, at the World Trade Center, and this is your areas of expertise, these global supply chains and trade. Those are very disruptive, and if companies in this region cannot get the component parts that they rely on, then they can't move forward. Asset values start to fall, private investment decline. Those are the biggest challenges when that happened. We've seen all the volatility of the stock market that has shown how that plays out in the past few weeks. Government revenues, we're just now starting to talk about those with eyes wide open about what a challenge is in front of us on the fiscal side of things. But these impacts become a downward spiral, and the worse things get, the worse things get. The only way to put a stop to those is to have some aggressive interventions. It starts with the direct payments and support, and we've seen that, of course. There's government investments, government spending, and then all the way up and down the transaction supply chain. The way it began is anybody who owed anybody anything was in need of help. We needed to help each other. Landlords needed to give flexibility to tenants. Businesses throughout the region were forced with a very difficult choice of either making payroll or paying rent. A lot of times they couldn't do either one. So landlords needed to help, but the landlords needed help from the lending institutions. The financial institutions needed to be there to help the landlords as well. Obviously, all this is in flux still. A lot of these things are still working themselves out. And the federal government needed to be there with the lending institutions as well. So that's how that capital chain is important to help each other out. And this was important. When we first started laying these interventions out, they sounded rather drastic in nature. But now you look back at it, and this simply looks like a rote list of what did happen, as plain as the nose on your face. But when we first started thinking about these things in early March, these seemed like drastic measures that we were hopeful would not have to happen. Just a few more slides to really understand the severity of the impact in Washington State. Here are unemployment claims in the state of Washington on a week-by-week basis up through May 2. I believe they'll update this on Thursday of this week for the subsequent week. The state estimates we're headed towards 1 million unemployment claims by the end of May, which would equate to roughly a 25% unemployment rate Right now, we're probably in the 15 to 20% range. They have a projection of $1.5 billion of payout to go with these unemployment claims.
Chris, can I ask a question?
Yeah, no, of course, please.
Actually, I was surprised to see the number dropping from the end of March until now. So what is the cause of that?
These are initial claims, right? So these are folks that made their initial claim for unemployment.
Okay.
And if they made a claim in March 28th, they're probably still unemployed, right? So this is that's the way to know those data there, Emily.
Perfect sense. Thank you.
Yeah, but the big point that I think we need to grapple with is that this is a system that was not designed to operate at this scale. And you can just, the point of this slide is to show the scale of the devastation that's come with it. This program is borne by the backs of employers. All of us that complete every quarter, we pay state unemployment insurance. It is spoken to as an insurance program that employers pay into. It's not designed to cover this level of payout. So the state will be grappling with that heavily in the coming weeks and weeks, and you can bet this will be a conversation in the months ahead. We've been doing some surveys for the mayor of Seattle and her team. There's a second round of the survey out as well. I'd encourage you to share that out with all your constituents, those of you that represent industry organizations. These are some of the concerns we heard during the first round at the end of March. Lack of cash reserves that come with these things. No small business thinks they need to plan for a pandemic, just not in the list of risks that one wants to plan for. The mayor's survey is focused on small and medium-sized business, and it does show some of the disproportionate impacts on small businesses. We're going to talk a little bit more about equity, I know, as we keep going. These data are now need to be updated a little bit, but the story remains the same about the consumer-facing sectors that are hit hardest with unemployment claims. Those shown in the blue bars add up to more than a third of all the unemployment claims, and those are really the consumer-facing sectors. A couple of other bars on that chart that might surprise folks. One is the construction industry, which we do expect to bounce back relatively well because of the nature of that industry that can start and stop, at least with the residential construction. It won't bounce back entirely, but we do expect that to be one of the easier industries to start back up at least a little bit. But that healthcare and social assistance category surprises folks. With the demand for hospitals that come with the virus, what is a surprise is how much that has displaced and offset other forms of healthcare activities. And now you're starting to see there's a big story in the paper right now about, or in the news today, about the University of Washington and the medical center and the financial crisis they're getting into. Every financial institution is going through their version of that. That category expands out to your dentist offices and your private practices and all those folks that were unable to maintain those non-emergent services, with huge questions that loom about consumers' comfort level to go back to that activity. Just a couple more data slides to set the stage. This slide shows by occupation, not by industry, some of those top-ranking industries. And what's important to highlight here is that the top-ranking occupations in terms of unemployment claims filed are also the lowest ranking wages. So all those service workers that we rely on to get through the week, each and every week, those are the ones most easily displaced through the shutdown. Restaurants and those folks are getting a lot of attention in the news, of course, but it expands to a broad swath of service workers that once you see them on a list, we start to realize how much we rely on folks earning that level of wage across the economy. The forecasts on a global basis, there's just some of the blue chip forecasts out of different financial institutions, including the Federal Reserve. On net for the year forecast, this is a little bit outdated. I think they're a little bit more pessimistic now, showing an annual decline for 2020, getting closer to a 10% forecast of a decline in 2020. This is a metric that economists hang to in the tenths of the percentage, right? So we get anxiety if it changes from 2.3 to 2.1 or 1.9%. So to drop off to that level of a decline is true devastation, and just something no one was equipped to be able to analyze and anticipate. What it might look going forward, here's a conceptual way to understand where I think we are and how to think about the three different phases. We are starting to emerge slowly and carefully out of what would be, the way I've called it, a crisis response phase, phase one. If you think of the red line as the virus positive metrics and the death rates that have come with dealing with the virus, and then the blue line as general economic productivity, you can use gross domestic product as a proxy for that if you'd like, or an annual basis. You can see sort of the volatility that we expect to happen. We're entering into a very uncertain period of phase 2 in which there is no vaccine or no treatment. And we'd expect the nature, and we're seeing this all across the headlines, of course, across the nation right now, of people taking risks and possibly having to dial things back. So we'll dial it up and we'll dial it down. And we don't know what that's going to look like, but it's those incidents of positive responses that are going to drive the economic pace of recovery up and down. Finally, we do expect to get out of this at some point. Those timelines are who knows? I'm no global health expert in terms of having any more certainty about when we will get a vaccine or a treatment, but I put some placeholder dates in there just to think about it. Once we have that in place, then we can really start thinking about what a recovery is. We anticipate that that's probably out in the earliest in the middle of next year, possibly longer. And once we have that, then some more certainty can return for economic recovery. Depending on how you think about a recovery, the previous slide just shows what it takes to get back to a normal annual rate. It's going to take us a lot longer to dig out of the hole that we're getting into with every passing month right now with the decrease of economic activity. So we need to be in it for the longer haul and to be thinking about what this means in the long term. It certainly means things like investments in public health and resiliency, and just an awareness of how those investments in resiliency are in fact economic imperatives now. So I'll stop dragging you through data and charts now. These are some areas of concerns that we're going to talk about a little bit as a team, and happy to go in different directions with these areas. Just want to cue these up for consideration, and Emily, I'll follow your lead on where you want to go next.
Well, why don't we actually just jump around a little bit? I know this is a little different than what we had planned on doing. And Brian, it looks like you have a change of scenery. So
I'm sitting closer to my router. I'm hoping that helps. I don't know.
Well, you look and sound fabulous. That's a great point.
All right,
so
good.
let's actually talk about the areas of concern first. Let's go back to Boeing and the aviation industry.
Yeah, I'll start, then I'll hand it over to Brian for some help here. You know, the pain of aerospace in this region started a long time ago with the 737 MAX challenges, and the productivity that is a measure of their activity, right? They were upwards of finishing 52 airplanes a month for the 737 MAX, as I recall, if I got that number right. And then they scaled it down to 42 per month as the completions as a result of the lingering challenges with the 737 MAX to get that airplane back in the air. And now with the virus and the hit on the demand of air travel that looms so large, since having such a devastating uncertainty, they've scaled that back even further and have started talking about layoffs. So those are the layers of impacts that we're suffering from. I think people sometimes tend to think, some people anyway, tend to overlook how important aerospace is still with this economy in the Puget Sound region. And it is a true cornerstone of the economy in 2020 as it has been. Yeah, that workforce is important. They define the manufacturing industries in our region. They have had a graying of a workforce challenge. So if there's any silver lining of possible hope for their way to manage the way out of it, they might be able to make this less impactful for the economy by folks taking early retirement and some margin of those workers being less displaced unexpectedly, and more just a rapid taper down of some trends that were underway.
Yeah, I'll just add a comment that, that's, clearly my biggest concern. And it's more than Boeing. We all know Boeing has tons of manufacturers in this region. So the impact goes further than that. We also have companies, there's a great company in Snohomish County that refurbishes and recertifies passenger aircraft. They hire 2,000 employees. That companies like that are going to be, severely impacted. But on the other side of that, I'm hoping that you see gains in, I know some people hate this term, but new space. So we're, in a couple of weeks, we're going to be launching for the first time two astronauts from U.S. soil, on a SpaceX capsule. SpaceX has a expanded facility in Redmond. Obviously, we have Blue Origin headquartered here and contractors around that too. But look, the impacts to Boeing and aerospace are going to be severe. I don't think we'll return to normal passenger air service for a number of years. Just yesterday, the Boeing CEO made a comment about one of the big airlines going bankrupt. So there'll be one or two. So there's going to be a lot of planes on the ground over the next couple of years as demand comes back, and that's unfortunate for this region.
Okay. Well, switching back to a more positive note, that Seattle is supposed to be among the first cities to come out of this, first in. We're in a good position to recover from it. But we did have our challenges before COVID-19. I mean, we've talked about in our previous calls about the traffic congestion and the lack of affordability and homelessness issues in our city. So while we might come out quicker, and we did have the fastest growing economy in the States last year, do we really want to go right back to where we are, or is it time to switch things up? Brian, can you start us off?
Yeah, absolutely. Chris outlined the kind of path to economic recovery. So this disaster is very different than other disasters, because most disasters happen in a number of hours, whether it's a hurricane or a flood or a tornado. So I was involved in the BP oil spill, which was a kind of a slow-moving train wreck, because if you remember, that oil was leaking for 5 months. I remember being in meetings in the Situation Room where there were scenarios being presented that we may never be able to cap that oil well. And so there was a lot of concern about, when does economic recovery actually begin? So, private sector investment tends to go where it feels safe. And right now, it's pretty clear that, there's really nothing that's safe right now because of all the uncertainty. So economic recovery probably won't start in earnest until we have a vaccine. So that's at least a year from now. So we have to prepare, as Chris pointed out in that chart earlier, that we're going to have a spiky year and a half ahead of us. And then we have to kind of, go all in on economic recovery. But when we get going on economic recovery, there's a couple of things that we have to focus on. Number one, I think, is that it's going to be very competitive. So we're not the only region that is going to be struggling to get back what it lost. And economic development, I'm an economic developer. It's a very competitive game. There are regions that are going to come here and try to steal our companies and industries, and we'll probably do the same to them. And so we have to remember that this is a competition when it comes to economic development. But we have to focus on economic recovery. We got to focus on maximizing federal resources. We want to accelerate economic recovery versus other regions in America. And we want to make sure that we build it back better than it was before. So to your point, Emily, our economy had some fundamental problems even before the pandemic. And there were things like traffic congestion and affordability and homelessness. And so we need to make sure that as we focus on building back an economy, that we're addressing those issues, that we're addressing issues of equity and inclusion, because we were kind of barreling down the path of San Francisco before, of creating an exclusive economy and not an inclusive economy, which is not a sustainable way to grow your economy. It's not sustainable, and it's not resilient, frankly, in the long term. And that's a word you'll be hearing a lot of in the years ahead, is resiliency. Everyone's going to be focused on how do you build a resilient economy, and one way you build a resilient economy is making sure that it's providing opportunity for everybody to prosper. And so I think we'll have opportunities in the coming years to kind of rethink the fundamentals of our economy and take advantage of, the fact that the economy that went into the pandemic will not be the same economy that comes out of it. And so we have to look at where those opportunities are and make sure we're changing the way we approach our economic growth going forward.
And So this has been brought up a couple times now, equity and inclusion, and I'll be honest, before we started having our conversations, I never thought about how we could improve on equity and inclusion as a result of COVID-19. So can you actually touch on that for our attendees?
Yeah, sure.
Talk about the positive side of that could happen?
Yeah, so as we, well, number one, I said this to you yesterday, my crystal ball just is malfunctioning. It seems to always malfunction on me, but I think,
unfortunate.
Yeah, I know, I got to get it fixed. But I think there's kind of four dynamics that we should look at. Number one is that our industry clusters generally in America are going to change, right? So some industry clusters are going to do well and some are not going to do well. We talked about aerospace being one that's not going to do well. Some that will do well are, healthcare and biosciences, cloud computing. I mean, here we are, using, internet and Wi-Fi. I think, if you look at the, stock prices of Amazon and Microsoft, you're seeing companies doing well now too. So I think we're going to have to really look at the industry clusters that make up our region and understand who's going to grow and who's not, and then adjust accordingly. I think another factor is going to be supply chains. Supply chains will adjust, from, just-in-time manufacturing or the concept of reshoring or onshoring manufacturing, the idea of, dispersing supply chains to get closer to communities. We are a region with, a lot of prowess in logistics infrastructure with 3 deep water ports. So there could be opportunities there to look at bringing advanced manufacturing or some kinds of manufacturing back from foreign locations. I think another factor that we're seeing right now is the advent of telework. So Zillow CEO announced, I guess a month ago, that he was allowing employees to work from home for the rest of the year. Microsoft and Amazon announced that they were going to allow their employees to work at home until the first week of October. And I don't know if you saw this, the Twitter CEO announced, I think yesterday, that he's going to allow their employees to work at home permanently if they so choose. And so I think that presents, challenges, obviously in real estate, but if you think about affordability and congestion, if you don't have to live in the center of this region or any region, you can live in Tacoma or Everett and still work for one of those great companies. You can own, a bigger house, could be more affordable, and takes another car or bus, off the street. So there could be, opportunities there. And then finally, Chris touched upon it also is, workforce skills. So as you look at industry clusters are going to grow and those that aren't, readjusting of supply chains, telework, we have an opportunity to make sure that we're, adjusting our workforce delivery systems to make sure that they're providing the skills in those areas. But also, look, our companies were facing talent shortages before this crisis. So this could create another opportunity for us to make sure that we're preparing our own workforce, our native workforce, to take jobs in those big companies. So I do believe in, making lemons out of lemonade, never, lose the opportunity of a good crisis or whatever, Rahm Emanuel or whoever takes credit for saying that. I think there's an opportunity here for us to kind of really think about how we're approaching sustainable economic growth to make sure that our economy is more resilient, more inclusive, more equitable. And those four things I listed are just kind of off the top of my mind. There's going to be so many other things that are going to pop up over the next 6 months. We just have to make sure that our senses are sharp, that we're looking at where those opportunities are and we're taking advantage of them, because other regions are doing that.
Perfect. And we have about 10 more minutes before we move on to Q&A, but there was one question that came through that we might want to address now, if I can find it on my screen. And Chris, I'm not sure if you can touch on this or Brian, but Christina was asking, how is equity affected by the pandemic?
Yeah, sure. Happy to talk about that. And I appreciate Brian's leadership.
That, yeah.
I appreciate Brian's leadership on that topic. I think it was a concern prior to the pandemic. It's a concern in terms of the impact on the pandemic, and Brian's doing yeoman's work to rank it high as consideration, a top priority as we get out of the pandemic. So I think that's good. Our concerns in different parts of the region. There's so many different ways to understand equity, both there's the way different communities are affected, both geographically, by race, by demographics, and there's a regional version. There's a lot of correlation with that, with places in South King County, for example, that hadn't participated in the prosperity the way that the rest of the region had. So a lot of conversations had been, how do we redirect some of our regional interests to areas like that need some help? Places like Redmond and Bellevue and Seattle really didn't need a whole lot of extra assistance to help to grow their economy. They were doing just fine to attract all the talent they could possibly need. One measure that I've heard someone say over the years about what's the metric of economic development, they said private investment, right? So everyone's efforts for economic development ought to result in private investment. And that might be a little bit narrow, but I like that as an indicator of how our efforts for economic development are resulting in impacts. So how can private investment occur in places where it hasn't been happening on its own, and how can our efforts to encourage growth in different parts of the region help to attract private investment? Is a good way to think about those things. Those slides I showed earlier were absolutely the definitive understanding of how, I guess they weren't the only definitive. It was the start with understanding how wages and occupations affect things. There's another part of the pandemic that folks are talking about really well, about equity concerns, which is things like social distancing is a privilege, right? I mean, a lot of people that are working multiple jobs and have an apartment and have kids at home and single parents and those things, they don't have the lifestyle that affords them a chance to retreat and do social distancing. Most of the workers in that category are not able to work from home because of the nature of their job. And then when they get home, there's even more challenges there through the lack of childcare, which ranks super high right now in terms of an equity concern. And a way out of it with the health crisis is, how do we return childcare back to an asset for our workforce? So all those things pile up, and they have profound equity implications during the pandemic, and they need to be solved for as we get out of it.
Okay, so this program is flying by. Thank you so much for all of that. So we know for the economic plan that you both are working on, and this is a result of Brian, you saying to your board, you think that the region needs a long-term plan. So you and Chris partnered on this. 3 parts to it: maximizing federal support, accelerating economic recovery, making sure we build it back better than it was before. How can companies be a part of the solution and innovation required to do these things?
So I just re-emphasize this is unprecedented, what we're dealing with, and so it's going to be all hands on deck. Nobody has all the answers. I've been calling my expert friends from around the country, and nobody has a playbook on how you recover your economy from this. So I think the good thing is that I've lived here for 1.5 years, and one of the things I love about this region is how innovative and pioneering we are. We like to cut our own path. I hear that a lot. So I do think, and in fact, I know that some of my colleagues around the country are looking to this region for leadership. They were looking for this region on leadership on how to deal with the pandemic, how to reopen businesses. We are being looked at from all over the world. So I think that will continue as we shift gears into economic recovery. I do think we could be an example for a lot of places on how to do it right. So to answer your question more directly, we are still working out the details, but the idea is that we would create a blue ribbon panel for economic recovery. That would include public and private sector folks, to make sure that we're focused on certain industry clusters. And in those industry clusters, we're going to need private sector expertise to serve on those subcommittees. And so there'll be lots of opportunity there. And also with regards to, workforce development, we're going to have to, garner a lot of information, glean a lot of information from our employers throughout the region about what they're dealing with, what kinds of skill sets they might need within their companies as they start to grow again or adjust their work and supply chain. So I think there's a lot of opportunity going forward to make sure that our public and private sectors are continuing to work together as we already have done. And that's my dog barking in the background. So
Not a lot to say about it.
Which he really never barks a lot. So that's kind of shocking to me. But so I think this is an opportunity to make sure that we have to work together as a region, number one. So, nobody's going to recover if Seattle doesn't recover. Nobody's going to recover if Snohomish County doesn't recover. We're all in the same boat together. So we absolutely should not balkanize right now and separate and try to compete with each other intra-regionally. That would be foolish. Our competition comes from outside the region. They're going to be coming here to try to take what we have. I guarantee you that, because as an economic developer, that's what I would do. So we got to work together. The way you work together is to make sure that the public and private sector are communicating and are hand in hand as we go through this recovery process.
Now, let me just add to Brian's, what he's speaking to there is the reason why we created Greater Seattle Partners. And I say we, not to pencil myself in all that much, other than I was just part of some of the preliminary conversations that led to the creation of Greater Seattle Partners.
Chris was a big part of that.
I appreciate that. What we were solving for is there was no regional entity that was focused on economic development, and we saw that as a big problem that we needed to solve for. It was fragmented. Folks in Pierce County were doing one thing, Snohomish County one thing, King County another thing. And even within the counties, the cities were challenged to figure out what does alignment and coordination mean. So Greater Seattle Partners was created with very much this intent to lead on a regional basis. And we have buy-in from the mayors of Tacoma, the mayor of Everett. Those folks want to participate on a regional scale in a way they've never wanted to in the past. So to have that alignment and momentum to collaborate on a regional basis is something we need to really run with. And that's absolutely, as Brian said, the best way out of this challenge.
Great. And I also love hearing the phone ring. It's such a good sign.
That's my bad. Sorry.
Hey, you're in the office. It's a good sign that it's ringing.
If I'm the only one here, that means there's no one who knows how to run the phone system at my office.
So before we move into Q&A, and everyone, if you can just go ahead and start writing your questions into the Q&A function or just directly in the chat. We already have some coming through, but we'll get to those in just a minute. So before that, Chris and Brian, as we've talked about, the only certain thing right now is the uncertainty that we're all facing until we have the vaccine. So what can people do right now? If you could give everyone one piece of advice for something they can do right now to get a jump start on the recovery without, just without any certainty, what would it be?
I would say help someone. Right,
yeah.
The opportunities to help are ever present, and there's this great old college book that I love. That sometimes the title's all you need to read, not the book itself. But it's do what you love, and the money will follow. There's a service orientation for business as well. There's a market to follow from the ways you can help. If you can identify a way to help somebody, there's a market that comes with that. So start there.
Love
yeah,
that.
I would just say that confidence, both consumer confidence and employee confidence. If you're an employer or if you're a business owner, consumer confidence and employee confidence in coming back to your restaurant or coming back to work is going to be really critical. That you do everything you can to make sure that your customers feel safe in your place of business, and that your employees feel safe coming back. So, there was a great tweet that I retweeted a couple of weeks ago. It's a technology incubator in Atlanta. A friend of mine runs it, who listed 20 things that they're doing, within their facility to make people confident. Everything from, manufacturing handles on doors so that you can open it with your elbow or your foot, to removing doors so people don't have to touch doors, to sensors so you don't have to press buttons. So anything you can do to bring back that confidence in your employees or customers is going to be really critical.
I saw you retweet that, and I took screenshots of it because it was such good information and things that I hadn't thought about before. But in restaurants, what do people do with their masks when they go sit down at a table? Are you going to have a sanitary place for them to put their masks in while they dine? So if you don't follow Brian on Twitter, you should. So some questions. One popular question, Chris, are you willing to share your slides?
Yeah, happy to do so. They're all over the place. Happy to share.
Okay, perfect. Brian, get out that crystal ball and maybe see if it'll work for this one. This is from Craig. The Association of Genuine Alaska Pollock Producers, a tenant here at World Trade Center Seattle, they're having a conference scheduled for October at Bell Harbor. They actually outgrew our venue here from last year. So they were planning on about 350 attendees. What are your thoughts, both of you, as such an event would be able to occur?
I consider myself an optimistic person, but I'm also on the board of Visit Seattle. And so I see a lot of the data and information, and it's hard to be optimistic because, again, as Chris said, I'm not a healthcare expert either, but if you listen to Dr. Fauci, they're worried about kind of a resurgence of coronavirus in the fall. I have a number of international trade shows I'm supposed to be going to in the fall, and I'm pessimistic that I'll be able to go. So I would, you say you're making arrangements for remote Zoom participation. I would lean heavily on that.
Yeah, and they are, and also it does seem like hybrid models will be the way to go in the future. I'm not sure that we'll ever be 100% back to fully in-person conferences and events.
I think one of the things we're waiting to see, and I've talked to Brian about this in the past as well, is how will consumer behavior change, right? So even if we solve for things on the provision end and we feel like we've provided a safe environment, will consumers come back? Right? What are the environments that our consumers, are they willing to put themselves in? I've said we need a public health confidence index as a way to gauge these things.
Yes.
There's this thing of a consumer confidence index that University of Michigan and others have put out that take surveys to say to the consumers, how confident are you in the economy? That will now inherently include how confident are they in the public health of the region or of the world. So that will be a big indicator to understand will attendees be willing to come even if we're doing everything we can on the facility side.
Thank you. Marty has a question. So in the future economy, do you think that the economy will be as tied to consumption as it is today?
Yeah, I think it will be. I think on the margins, there'll be some changes. I think we're seeing in one of Brian's calls he hosted, he had a site selector in that's got one of the best in the country, and he was talking about some of the changes in onshoring manufacturing that are happening on the margins. We don't expect that to be a profound change immediately, but a lot of that incremental shift towards making more things here and relying less on a global supply chain is a real trend underway. I just don't know how big of a dent it'll make to affect that question. So I think we'll still be a consumer economy. If you look back at the recession of 2008 to 2009, in my talks over the years, and I've been doing this for about 15 years to talk about what drives the economy, I've always shown a light on debt in the U.S. and my concerns about Americans' comfort level with debt. And after the recession of 08 and 09, we saw a quick drop of debt where Americans were taking a break on loans and credit cards and things, and savings had a little bit of an uptake, but it didn't last terribly long. It's surprising how quickly we forget to move on and just assume everything's going to be okay. So I don't think we're going to change who we are as a culture in the U.S. in terms of consumption. It'll be a big hit, but I think in time, whatever that timeline looks like, a consumer economy will still be who the U.S. is.
So Chris, in your crystal ball, what do you see? Do you see a V, a W?
I have a W, lots of W.
Lots of W's.
Wobbly W, yeah. Until we get the vaccine or a reliable treatment. I just cannot imagine we get through the next 12 months without some starts and stops and some real tough stops, you know.
Right.
And if it's not Dr. Fauci or Governor Inslee that's making this stop, then smart people are going to stop all by themselves and change their behavior patterns. So I think it's a very wobbly next 12 months.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, this is the last call for questions. If no one else has any other questions, then we will give you a break. As we mentioned at the beginning of the program, we know everyone is a little zoomed out. And let me just go through and make sure that we have not missed anything. Looks like we have answered everything. So Brian and Chris, thank you so much for all of your insight today and the slides. This was all really helpful, and hopefully everyone has a few takeaways from this. Our next program will be in a couple of weeks, May 27th, I believe, and it will be focused on, you know, the changes that companies may need to make as the state opens back up. So we'll be releasing more information on that soon. We will also be sending out a survey today for this program. So everyone who attended, please fill it out. It only takes a minute. We really appreciate your feedback. And Craig is reminding us that for you members, I was wrong. We have our virtual monthly member happy hour tomorrow, and we will be going into breakout rooms and playing a little trivia. And the question, it's going to be fun. So if you have an RSVP, please do so. But thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe, stay healthy. Take care.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
See you guys.